Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely fascinating, looking at the human body as the ultimate adaptive engine. Think about it. It's this incredible biological machine that is constantly balancing two massive opposing forces. On one side, you've got the intense, explosive demands of external physical training, and on the other, the quiet, relentless, internal process of aging.
So, to kick things off, we really have to ask ourselves a fundamental question. How exactly does our physical machine simultaneously manage hoisting heavy weight plates in the gym and the passing of decades on the calendar? It's a pretty wild paradox, because on one hand, we possess this remarkable ability to build incredible resilience, muscle, and power, yet on the flip side, our foundational internal systems are gradually and inevitably changing as we get older.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the body's adaptive engine. Compare novice versus elite athletes, explore the limits of physical adaptation, dive into the endocrine aging process and how the body compensates, and finally, look at optimizing your healthy lifespan.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the body's adaptive engine, an overview.
Basically, it all boils down to one concept: homeostasis. We're talking about the state of steady internal, physical, and chemical conditions maintained by living systems. Honestly, whether you're deadlifting huge weights to build strength or just navigating the natural physiological changes of getting older, your body's primary overriding goal is always fighting to maintain this vital baseline of homeostasis. Every single adaptation we're about to cover, it's just your body's brilliant way of protecting its balance against stress.
Moving right along to Section 2, Novice versus Elite Athletes, Adapting to Stress.
Now, the physical adaptation process looks vastly different depending on where your starting line is. For a recreational trainee or a total novice, their adaptive reserve is practically a superpower. Because their baseline is lower, they experience rapid neuro gains and need a much lower volume of training to see massive results. It brings almost easy progress. But elite athletes? Well, they face a really frustrating scenario of diminishing returns. They hit physiological ceilings, which means they need highly complex, periodized stimuli just to make millimeter improvements. It's literally like trying to squeeze extra horsepower out of an already perfected Formula One race car.
To give you a real-world sense of what that looks like in practice, just consider the number 620. To push past their physiological ceiling, research shows that elite youth sports school students log an astounding 620 minutes of training per week. That is an immense volume of physical stress deliberately applied just to force the body to continue adapting.
Compare that to just 155 minutes per week for their non-athletic peers. This massive gap perfectly highlights the extreme external stress required to force elite adaptation versus just normal activity. When you're sitting near your genetic ceiling, the dose of stress required to trigger a disruption in homeostasis, and thus force a new adaptation, is absolutely staggering.
Now, when we look at how this adaptation actually unfolds over time, notice what happens in the first 1 to 4 weeks. Those initial strength gains, they aren't actually from bigger muscles. It's basically your nervous system learning to recruit motor units efficiently and reducing antagonist co-contraction. Think of it like a software update for your brain. Then, as we move into weeks 4 to 8, we see early hypertrophy. That's when the muscle fibers actually start growing in size. And finally, months down the line, we see profound structural and architectural changes, like altered pennation angles and fascicle lengths, essentially rewiring and redesigning the body's hardware to transmit force better.
Let's dive into Section 3, the limits of physical adaptation, muscle fibers, and fatigue.
A critical metric we have to look at here is the rate of force development, or RFD. This is simply the speed at which muscular force is produced. Elite athletes possess superior early-phase RFD, meaning they generate massive force in the very first 0 to 100 milliseconds of movement. This happens due to highly efficient spinal reflex pathways, enabling explosive movements that recreational athletes simply haven't neurologically developed yet. Your nervous system literally has to be trained to fire that fast. No way around it.
And down at the cellular level, we see this fascinating evolutionary trade-off of resistance training. When untrained people start lifting, their highly fatigable, superfast type 2X fibers actually transition into moderately fatigue-resistant type 2A fibers. Basically, your body sacrifices absolute peak speed for the ability to resist fatigue. However, and this is super cool, some genetically gifted elite athletes, particularly in power sports, actually manage to preserve those high-power 2X fibers under highly specialized training. It is a rare and incredible exception to the rule.
Pivoting gears a bit, let's look at Section 4, the endocrine aging process, the passage of time.
The insights we're unpacking here aren't just guesses. They come from highly rigorous, systematic, evidence-based analyses of endocrine aging research. By reviewing data spanning competitive endocrine achievements and hormonal disorders, scientists have isolated exactly how our internal chemistry changes over decades. We've got meticulous, peer-reviewed data showing precisely what happens to our hormonal environment as the clock ticks.
So as that endocrine engine wears down over time, older adults become increasingly vulnerable to chronic conditions, with the most prominent being sarcopenia. This is the gradual and multifocal loss of muscle mass, strength, and overall function. But what's absolutely vital to understand is that sarcopenia is heavily driven by endocrine deterioration. The very muscle tissue we fought so hard to build through physical training is directly stripped away when our hormonal support system begins to falter.
What we really need to wrap our heads around is that this hormonal drop is not just some passive marker of getting older. It is the active, mechanistic driver of disease. When estrogen drops in midlife, it heavily disrupts metabolism and fat deposition. When testosterone gradually declines, it weakens muscle and bone while simultaneously spiking systemic inflammation. And as insulin resistance creeps in, it actively drives risks for type 2 diabetes and even neurodegeneration like Alzheimer's. The hormonal shift is the literal trigger here.
Which brings us right to Section 5, how the body compensates, the internal fight.
Because our bodies don't just give up. Much like a master mechanic fixing a classic car to keep it running smoothly, our bodies trigger molecular crosstalk to desperately preserve our internal homeostasis. If hormone levels drop, the body might engage receptor sensitization, literally making tissues more sensitive to whatever tiny amount of hormone is left. It might activate alternative signaling pathways or fundamentally adjust metabolic and immune functions, for instance, shifting how we process fat when testosterone declines. Your body is constantly fighting a brilliant defensive battle to keep you functioning.
Finally, let's wrap it all together in Section 6, Optimizing Your Healthy Lifespan, the Unified Strategy.
By combining targeted geroscience interventions, like precision endocrinology and hormone modulation, with intelligent, periodized resistance training tailored to your specific training status, you effectively create a shield against aging. We can actively enhance our endocrine resistance through lifestyle changes targeting that muscle-liver depots crosstalk and by strategically managing fatigue and recovery. It's not just about training blindly anymore. It's about providing the exact right stimulus to extend our functional health span.
Knowing your body's incredible capacity to both adapt to extreme physical stress and compensate for the march of time, I want to leave you with this thought. How will you challenge your own adaptive engine today? Your adaptive reserve is sitting there, waiting to be utilized. So what specific, calculated stress will you apply today to upgrade your human machine for tomorrow? Thank you for jumping into this explainer with me, and keep building that adaptive machine.